asking questions so that we are able to get the microphone to you in good order. This morning, we're pleased to be joined as well by the Permanent Secretary in the Office of the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, Mrs. Audrey Sewell, as well as heads of agencies at the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation and in the Office of the Prime Minister. This morning, we're pleased to be joined by members of the media from the RJR Gleaner Group, the Jamaica Information Service, PBCJ, CVM Communications Group, Nationwide News Network, Business Access, TBC, and Sportsmax. Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister, the Most Honourable Andrew Holness, will give an overview, and then we will take your questions. Prime Minister.
All right, good morning, everyone. Since this is really not my press conference, it is $86.8 billion, $23.9 billion more than the budgeted target. The tax revenue is at $54.5 billion compared to $51.2 billion budgeted. And this is the best tax revenue performance since 2002-2003 fiscal year. According to the World Bank, Jamaica is ranked 12th best place to start a business in the world. The income tax threshold, the second phase, took effect on April 1, 2017. This resulted in the threshold moving to $1.5 million. In fact, to be specific, $1,500,096. Very important. This adjustment also resulted in an additional increase of $499,824. The effective threshold for the 2017 year of assessment will therefore be $1,375,140, and the full threshold of $1.5 million will become effective on January the 1st, 2018. I have spoken a lot already about the NHT, and just to run through some of the benefits that we have given. We've had several policy changes. The policy changes will increase the amount of money persons will be able to access on the open market. Previously, only contributors who were constructing or who were buying into new development whose practical completion certificate dated the 1st of September 2015 and after could borrow up to $5.5 million for open market loans. Now, a qualified contributor can access this loan category and borrow up to $5.5 million to purchase any house on the open market. The loan limit for what they call it the 15 plus category has been increased from 1.5 million to 2.5 million. The government also increased benefits to persons with disabilities. The government will provide a grant to NHD mortgagors with disabilities for those who reside with and care for a family member with disabilities. The grant is to be used to retrofit or upgrade the dwelling to make it suitable to serve low-income construction subsidy. We have a housing microfinance and mortgage financing program. And all of these will increase the uptake of housing loans for low-income earners, particularly those persons in the tourism sector. The housing microfinance project, which began on April 1, 2017, will target low-income contributors. It will allow contributors to repair or improve their existing homes or build their own homes, one step at a time, with a maximum of $850,000 loan with a tenure 6 months, 5 years. Self-employed individuals and some private entities that have challenges in keeping up with their mortgages will also benefit from this program, and there is a contribution of arrears code to the system. In terms of laws passed into legislation since the start of the year, of significance is the Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures Act. You would also note that we passed the National Identification Systems Bill, the regulations to complete the legislative framework for not the special zones that we talk about, but another special zones, the special economic zones, which is very important. In terms of employment and job creation, data from the Statistical Institute of Jamaica show that the number of persons securing employment peaked at a historic 1,204,800 in April 2017, which was 35,800 more than the 1,169,000 persons employed in April 2016. The outturn bettered the employment level of 1,187,000 in July 2016, when the country recorded the lowest unemployment figures in 5 years and the highest employment level for a single month since October 2008, when 1,174,500 persons had jobs. Very important to note that this figure of 35,800 is net new jobs. And it is also important to note that the labor force rose, so the number of persons seeking jobs increased. So whilst the number of persons seeking jobs are increased, net new jobs have increased. I gather, I don't have it written here, but I recall seeing a figure that the gross new jobs created was somewhere in the region of about 50,000 new jobs. So that is an amazing performance for the economy. That is really the first sign that you will get growth, but not just growth in terms of expansion in stocks or increase in transaction, but growth that is inclusive, growth where people can participate in the expansion of the economy. And the way to participate in the expansion of the economy is through employment. So that is something that the country can be very proud of, and it is the first sign that the economy is starting to turn for the better. In education, there is an increase in budgetary support allocation for schools. The budget increased from $2.6 billion to $5.3 billion at the secondary level. So we have seen quite a bit of back and forth between some schools and the minister. Some of it has been, I think, too confrontational. When it comes to education, I think that is the platform where we can have a certain partnership. And the facts are that the government acknowledges that what is required to deliver a first-class education, we are not yet at the point to support the budget to that level. But it should also be acknowledged that the government is doing the best it can in increasing its allocation to schools. And whilst we are increasing the allocations to schools, schools must be accountable for this so that the output in education increases. And when the output in education increases, both in terms of certification, in terms of skills and competence, it makes the growth agenda that much more easier to attain. Certainly, it also helps the employment agenda. So I would like to see a more cooperative consultation and more cooperation between schools and the ministry as it relates to the implementation of the no tuition policy and the ministry's thrust for greater accountability for the use of public resources that we are putting under the stewardship of educational leaders. The HOPE program is moving apace. We are still in the development phases. I have here in my notes that we have just about found jobs now for 500 persons, but I recall reading an email where I think you told me now that you're going up to about 2,000 in another week or so. You will be able to tell me where we are with that. What we have done is to, instead of going with a full-scale implementation, we want to develop the protocols around it. We want to develop the framework. So we have started almost with a proof of concept, and then we're going to rapidly expand. So we have, I believe we have now proved the concept, we have worked out the protocols, and now we are moving in the phase of rapid expansion. Tourism continues to be a great performer. The country has earned a record $2 billion during the first 8 months of the 2017-2018 financial year. The figure represents an increase of 8.3% in gross foreign exchange earnings, more than the $1.83 billion earned last year over the same period. Some of you would have been here when we launched the GeoJ portal in August, and that is a major milestone towards providing information on a digital platform, on one platform, for the citizens of the country to access. In terms of national security, we implemented the National Service Corps, and that has begun. The Army in particular has implemented their segment of it with the National Service Corps enlistment, and the first batch is due to graduate sometime on Saturday, at which I will be speaking. And the program is continuing. In terms of water, one of the projects that I feel so good about is opening the water supply for Rosewell in Clarendon. I had toured that area before during the election campaign and made a commitment that I would deal with their water problem when I won and became the Prime Minister. And I am fulfilling my obligations. And I went there and turned the tap, and water just came gushing out. And the people were very happy. I still have a few more of those promises to fulfill, and I am going to make sure that they happen. But outside of that, advances are being made on the non-revenue water project for Kingston and St. Andrew. This project is supposed to last for 5 years, and we're making steady progress in mapping our meters and finding leaks, so we'll be able to reduce non-revenue water loss. The NWC hosted a regional water financing conference in partnership with the IDB in May 2017, and the conference was a huge success in terms of rural water, rain harvesting, solar power systems were installed in 10 schools. And I think this is something to note, that we are moving towards the sustainable provision of water in areas where we cannot supply water using the conventional pipe system. These will become good test cases to see how we can expand water by using water catchment and solar pumping as alternative solutions. There are some other major water projects. The head of the NWC is here, and I'll allow him to face some of the questions and tell you more about those major projects. I wanted to spend just 2 minutes on the legislative agenda again, the MOCA bill will come to Parliament. Well, it is already laid, but I will open debate on the MOCA bill on Tuesday. Minister Truck, the anti-corruption bill, that is in its final stages. And on Friday, the Senate will complete its debate on that bill. And we are also hoping that this Friday, the Senate will take the pension bill. So we would have completed, I think, an astonishing year of passing legislation. I don't think any other government has managed to pass so many significant pieces of legislation as we have done, given our parliamentary circumstances. But we have done it. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've given you my brief overview.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you so much. In addition to the media I recognized earlier, may I also tell you that Mellow FM and the Jamaica Observer are also here. May I also welcome viewers on JNN and CNS who are live, as well as OPM TV, the GIS website, and on Facebook. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, it's time now for your questions. We have 2 microphones in the audience at this point. We ask that you raise your hand, wait to be identified. When you are identified, would you please state your name and the media entity you represent, and of course, pose your question. I see a hand in the back, the gentleman here. Yes.
Edmund Campbell, Gleaner Company. Good morning, Mr. Prime Minister.
Good morning, Edmund.
The Electoral Commission of Jamaica said that it is well advanced in proposing legislation to deal with by-elections within a specified time. I know that you had made a recommendation some time ago that you would prefer to see a system whereby we have fixed elections. So I suspect that this may resonate with your government. What's your thinking on that? That's one. And two, I have to revisit an issue that I raised with you the last time regarding the Port Authority of Jamaica. This matter, based on my information, is still outstanding. The pension payments, overpayments, the Auditor General's report. Could you give us an update as to where we are now?
Thank you, Edmund. In terms of the proposals made for legislation for a fixed term or a fixed period of time when a by-election is called, I have no difficulty with that. The truth is that we are already preparing legislation for fixed election dates. Minister Truck, if you're prepared, you could give us an update as to where we are. But we have done our own briefing paper. I believe we actually went to the stage of tabling the actual bill itself. Yeah, but we have given drafting instructions already, precisely. So we would have gone through the process. So, you know, I don't want to give you a commitment here because I don't know exactly where it is in the process, but I would say that if the process finishes before the end of the year, we would want to take that bill as quickly as possible. So, you know, we welcome all the suggestions that are being made about a fixed time for calling by-elections and fixed election dates. It's something that we agree with. And in fact, within the framework of the fixed election date, we would have also addressed calling by-elections within a specified period of time. On the Port Authority matter, I'm not able to give you an update at this time. It's something that I would prefer to research and give you probably an email explaining. I do know that the matter is still before the Attorney General's chambers. We had gotten an initial response from the AG, but we had to refer the matter to the AG again, and we await their final response on the matter.
All right, thank you. I see Janella Perseus at that side.
Prime Minister, my name is Janella Precious, TBJ. I'm right here, sir.
I'm
I'm right here. I'm right here.
I'm sorry,
Right
Janella,
here?
could you stand for us?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes.
We couldn't
My
see.
apologies. Sir, following up on Edmund's question about elections and by-elections, the government you've come under extreme pressure regarding the announcement of a $625 million road improvement project in Junction. Sir, was it politically motivated, or is it a genuine, your response, sir?
You know, I am not a prophet. I am not a reader man. So, when my parliamentary colleague and friend rose in Parliament on sometime in July, I believe it's the 27th, 25th of July, and tabled the questions, unfortunately, right after that, very soon after that, we went on parliamentary recess. But the answers were prepared. In fact, I had the answers ready for the first day of Parliament after the recess. But unfortunately, when I came to Parliament, it was after questions had passed, so I didn't bother to pursue the questions. Now, the origin of this project started in 2008. When our government at the time decided that we would fix this road. Now remember, we were fixing the north-south road, well, the north coast road, going all around to Portland. And so the logical step would be to do Junction. We made allocations and made provisions for it. It didn't happen. The previous government also said they were going to do it. And I believe they had found the resources. I believe it was the Kuwaiti funds, Kuwaiti loan funds. It didn't happen. In fact, the loan funds expired. The issue came up again. We this time decided, you know what? We won't wait for loan funds. We won't try to put it under any multilateral program. This road is so bad, GOJ will make an allocation out of its capital budget and do it, right? And we made that decision. The cabinet decision is August 2016. It appeared in the budget, so anyone can check. That figure is there in the budget. It is a significant work, 600. Right, the overall project is 600 million, roughly. But because it's such a big project and we're doing it out of our own limited funds, we're going to do it in 2 phases. So the first phase is this year for 167 million. Now, what you know in politics is that no matter what you do, you can't win. Because if you waited, you would hear that we don't want to fix the road because it's all kinds of issues. And when we fix the road, you hear we're fixing it because it's all kinds of issues. Well, look, it is better to do and be criticized than not do and be criticized. That is how we operate as this government. So we had already decided, even before this unfortunate circumstance where my colleague in Parliament passed, that we would have done this in September. This was already decided. And I'm certain that if Dr. Green were here today, he would be very happy with the decision of this government to move ahead and fix the road. Right? He wouldn't want, because of politics, the people of Southeast St. Mary don't get the benefit. Not just Southeast St. Mary. Anyone who uses Junction Road know that this is a no-brainer. Fix the road. And so we have done it. And not everything is driven by politics. Not everything is driven by politics. That's my answer to you.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. As we did the last time as well, we are including questions from social media, and there are several that we have. We'll take some more from the floor first and then go to social media. I recognize Mrs. Jackson-Miller. Could you identify yourself, please, and ask your question as well?
Thank you, Naomi. Dion Jackson-Miller, RGR Group. Couple questions. First of all, just following up on Janella's question, Mr. Prime Minister, is it then that you reject completely the concerns which have been expressed by the political ombudsman in regard to the timing of this particular project? And then in relation to ZOSO, which you obviously have assumed responsibility for, or have responsibility for, does your primacy in areas like Zoso, the Mocha Bill, and so on indicate a lack of confidence in your national security minister?
All right, let me start with the concerns that have been raised. The Contractor General is the constituted authority to oversee the contracting process, and the National Contracting Commission, National Contracts Commission, the NCC, also has a constituted role in terms of a statutory role in ensuring that the contract process is integrous. And I respond to them in these matters. The government is not using state resources for partisan benefit. And that is just a definitive statement. And in this particular matter, for the allocation of resources for the road, there is no basis for anyone to lodge any complaints for political abuse of public resources. In terms of Zoso and the Mocha Bill, Zoso is a product of the National Security Council. The National Security Council is a mechanism to use the whole of government to fight crime, to bring rule of law. That's the term, the appropriate term. The National Security Council comprises the Ministry of National Security, the Commissioner of Police, the Chief of Defense Staff, the head of MOCA, and the ministers that have direct portfolio responsibility that impact upon law and order and the rule of law. So, no, it does not replace or show any lack of confidence, but because it requires the center of government to weave together all the different elements, it requires the Prime Minister to take a prime role in this regard. The Mocha Bill, I brought it to Parliament. It is likely that I will ask the Minister of National Security to take it. The reason why I take so much interest in the Mocha Bill is that our multilateral partners have taken such a great interest in it, and in working with them from a whole of government perspective, I gave the undertaking to have this bill move through the process very quickly, and that explains my interest in MOCA.
All right, thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. You know, we have about approximately 100 questions on social media, so let me just get to one and then come back to the floor. Mr. Ryan Foster, PM, is asking you, is it feasible to mandate companies that are building new subdivisions with more than 500 or 1,000 homes to include the physical plant of a school or fire station in the design and building phase, and the government can give these companies incentives to build these buildings?
There is a requirement for large developments to make reservations, that I'm certain of, not necessarily to build. Sometimes in collaboration with the Ministry of Education or with the various agencies, they actually work together and build. I'm not certain if the threshold is 500 units. NEPA is here, and the Permanent Secretary from the Ministry of Economic Growth is here. They could give you the specific answers. But what would be the threshold per category? Well, look, what I'm saying is the provision is already in the law. So the agencies that do the permitting would consider what is being done, consider the population around it, work with the Ministry of Education and make a determination. But I do know, for example, that certain developments that are now going in Clarendon, where the NHT is sponsoring, they have actually built a police station and they have made reservations for a basic, an infant school and a primary school. So, yes, so the consideration would be to the entire area. So the general answer to Ryan is yes, it is possible and it is being done now.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. I recognize Ms. Virtue.
Good morning, Prime Minister. My name is
Erica
Virtue. Okay, all right. So weeks into your tenure as Prime Minister, I wrote a story which was not denied, that you had an intention of coming up with job description for ministers. I'm asking today if these were ever done, and if yes, is that part of the reason influencing the consideration for a cabinet reshuffle? That's one. And two, is there a worrying concern that the way information on government policy is communicated by the information minister leaves much to be desired, requiring a myriad of clarifications later, and we all know of them? And are you considering that your new information minister will be based at the office of the Prime Minister?
Thank you, Erica. We have not completed the job description in terms of actually presenting those letters to the ministers. We are still in the process of developing those. And for good reason, we've had to shift resources to deal with issues that have arisen. But I want to bring the nation up to date that 3 weeks ago, we had a 3-day private retreat of the cabinet where we went through a very rigorous process where each minister had to do a review of their performance to date, give the cabinet a projection of what they plan to do for the completion of this year and what they would like to see in the budget for next year. And each minister was required to give the cabinet a self-assessment of their own performance. This is a performance management tool for me and for the ministers themselves to figure out where they are and what they need to improve. I alerted that we can't rest on our laurels, we can't feel satisfied with our performance. Certainly, we have performed better than the previous administration, but bear in mind, the public never held the previous administration's performance as the benchmark. The benchmark is much higher, and the government has to keep increasing its performance to a higher benchmark. And so the ministers are aware of this. So we recommitted ourselves not to become complacent. That's number one. And number two, not to become arrogant. So, the government is introspecting. And I would say that, as I said yesterday, the ministers are mentally prepared that there will be a reshuffle coming. In terms of information delivery, I think this government has approached it in a very transparent way. We make ourselves available, and we have regular and routine interface with the press. But like, all governments, as you could see with the United States and other countries, managing the dissemination of information is never easy. And sometimes we don't get it right. Sometimes we don't get it accurate. But I wish to assure the press that where errors are made, where mistakes are made, the posture of the government is to be corrected, to accept the errors, and to, when we have verified, inform the public of what is correct. Let me just be frank with you. It's not easy to stand in front of a microphone and deliver information. Sometimes what you want to say is not what is heard. It is a skill, and people literally have to be trained in it. And so, yes, we do have a program internally of trying to coach our spokespersons to provide information to the public. But I would just close by saying we have no nefarious intent when we provide information.
Prime Minister, let's go back to social media. Chantilly R. Brown asks, why is the government of Jamaica not investing more money into surveillance cameras or CCTV? And secondly, I will not edit, how do you plan on ridding the JCF of criminal cops?
Let me start with cameras. There is under consideration, I'm not sure if the Minister of National Security had put this out in the public domain already. I'm almost sure that something was mentioned. But there is under consideration now a program to develop a public-private partnership to have cameras installed. So we're hoping to work with businesses who already have cameras, new housing developments who want to put in cameras. We will develop a protocol. It's a requirement now for the housing developments, but for the already existing businesses, we're trying to develop now a protocol in which we can use privately owned cameras to point in public direction and have their IP address sent to a central database. So that will be a fairly easy way of expanding camera coverage, CCTV networks right across the country, and increase the capacity of the law enforcement agencies to see what is happening in public spaces. That is being worked out now. There may be some fiscal incentives required. The level of that is also being worked out. So pretty soon, you will hear more about those details from the Minister of National Security. At some point in time, and we'll need the support of the citizenry of Jamaica and the press of Jamaica to address the issue of corruption in the police force. It is something that is coming up more and more on our radar. And it is under discussion by the National Security Council. It is not for want of knowledge of the corruption. I think the intelligence network is quite clear that there is a very high level of corruption. It is now to develop the courage, both in terms of the government and the citizenry, because you will hear the talk that we need to deal with corruption. But when you actually start to put in place the measures, then you hear the counter arguments. You hear victimization, you hear issues of salary and pay. But the truth is that the good men and women of the security forces are being smothered by the bad apples. And it is really diminishing the capacity of the force to truly tackle crime. In particular circumstances where members of the security forces are associated with criminal masterminds. I mean, that to me is the most dangerous one, because every action that the police may take is potentially compromised. So there is now under consideration strategies as to how to deal with corruption in the force. And I'm saying to the citizens of Jamaica, I want your support when we eventually move to deal with this matter.
All right, let's get back to the floor at the front. Balfour.
Yes, sir. Balfour Henry, Jamaica Observer. I just wondered, sir, if you could explain what are your concerns about the progress of the talks involving the public sector transformation, the public sector pension, the wage issue, all of those concerns that were raised by the IMF team that was here the other day, whether you could tell us whether you're satisfied that it is something that can be resolved, or whether you have some grave concerns about it. And the other thing I want to know, sir, is whether you could give us some update on the Southeast Coastal Highway and the expansion of the Petrojam refinery.
Thank you, Balfour. I'll speak in generalities as it relates to wage negotiations, because those are specific and there is a process which I really don't want to interfere with until there is an outcome. The wage negotiations are critical to the government, well, to the country meeting the targets that we have agreed with the IMF. Let me put it another way. These targets are not the IMF's targets. These targets are critical for the economy to grow and for the sustainability of our economy, for the creation of prosperity. So this is really us committing to ourselves to do what is right by ourselves. The wage negotiations are critical in that regard. We have adopted a posture of partnership, of being respectful and understanding. So particularly as it relates to the debate on the pension bill, we have not sought to push through the bill. We had given ourselves a target. We are 6 months off that target because we believe it is more important to have all the stakeholders comfortable with this very fundamental change in how the public sector operates. So our posture is to spend more time on negotiation, deliberations, ensuring that our stakeholders understand and are comfortable. However, we do not have an infinite period of time. The longer we wait in the negotiations and the longer the negotiations take, the greater risk we are at missing the targets and therefore threatening the economic growth and sustainability. So those are my general comments on the wage bill, the wage negotiations, and the pension reform. I am not satisfied with the pace of public sector reform. It is too slow, and the longer it takes, the benefits of it will be lessened. And in fact, the lesson we have learned is that we have tried to do public sector reform already. We started in 2009, and the same thing happened. It dragged until it fell off the radar, and then it ended up being shoved off somewhere, and then you don't hear about it again. I'm not going to allow the same thing to happen this time. Jamaica is entering into a new paradigm. Under the old paradigm, we depended on the public sector to create jobs because we did not trust or believe that the private sector could create jobs. So for politicians, the easiest way to address the issue of employment was through expanding the public sector. But that has never resulted in economic growth. It has never resulted in a sustainable economy. The new paradigm is where we have to build a partnership with the private sector, because the real engine of growth is the private sector. And the role of the public sector is to support the private sector. And it makes sense, because the taxes that pay your wages come from the private sector. The private sector doesn't generate tax. The public sector rather doesn't generate tax. So if you really are looking at the bigger picture about better pay and better conditions of work, then that can only come when your economy is growing. So the model that we have to pursue is one in which the public sector recognizes that its role is to be efficient in the processes that by law it is required to do, in permitting, in approvals, in policy development, in regulation, in creating markets, in bringing resources together with opportunities. That is the role of the private sector. And the faster we are able to do this role, the more our economy will grow. So, you know, I make the observation that the process is slowing down, even though this administration has put in a more systematic approach towards the transformation. We have identified the agencies, we have put in place a system to identify redundancies in the public sector, to identify agencies that have reached their sunset, and that is going. But the pace is just too slow. So I will be paying close attention to it and getting involved in making sure that agencies that are identified for mergers, that happens very quickly. Those that have reached sunset, that those are taken off the government's budget. But we also have to look at performance, because the public sector has a genuine claim about how they are rewarded. It is not just that the public sector isn't paid at the level of the private sector or paid enough, but I think that there's a bigger problem, is that the public sector does not pay by virtue of effort. You could be in the public sector, working, someone puts out great effort, someone puts out no effort, and they get the same pay. To me, that is the bigger problem. And I think if members of the public sector look at this too, they will agree that this is the bigger problem. If you don't have to put out effort and you get the same pay. So the transformation of the public sector is not about just closures and mergers and dismissing people, which is what the conversation has always been. The transformation of the public sector is to make it performance-based, so that people who want to work get paid better. For too long, we have had a system where people can hide and don't work and get paid. And we are paying for that all the time. Once you have a system that is not producing and you have to pay, then if you don't produce, then you're going to have to borrow to pay. And that is a part of the explanation of the high debt. So, I don't want to do too much lamentation in the public domain. But I think many of these issues need to be brought to the fore. They need to be interrogated and written about by the media, because the conversation has to change if the paradigm of how we are going to transform Jamaica is to change.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Again, from the floor, Tona.
Oh, the last one.
I'm
You
sorry
have two
about
questions.
that. Yeah.
Petrojam,
Sorry about that.
the South Coast Road Improvement Project is ongoing. So the design is being finalized, and an environmental impact assessment is done already. Great. So it is in progress. It is in progress. To do a roadway like that, we have to meet the regulatory requirements, to meet the environmental issues, and then to finalize the design. It does take some time, and I think we're moving apace and meeting the targets set by our Chinese counterparts who are funding the project.
Balfour, if you... Balfour?
It's a difficult question to answer, because the refinery upgrade has been on the table for a long time. And since the escalation of events in Venezuela, nothing has changed. In other words, we are not closer to a refinery upgrade. We did sign, I believe earlier this year, a refinery upgrade memorandum of understanding with the government of Venezuela, but we have just not moved past that as yet.
All right, thank you, Prime Minister. May I remind members of the media, please wait to be acknowledged, and then you ask your question. Tona, please, go ahead.
Morning, Prime Minister. Tona Thomas from Nationwide. I have 3 questions. First, on crime and leadership.
3.
3. The competence of the National Security Minister, Robert Montague, is oftentimes called into question. He's sometimes ridiculed as well in the public domain for his comments. Are you satisfied with the leadership of your National Security Minister? You also spoke of a possible shuffle of the cabinet. Can we expect that the National Security Minister will be one of those persons who will be reassigned? And my third question is, you said that crime fighting is testing your leadership. Despite the implementation of the zones of special operation, you said crime is still increasing at an alarming rate. Are you losing the crime fighting battle, Prime Minister?
Well, every minister has their own style. Minister Montague has his own style and how he engages. And no prime minister should try to curb the style and the particular idiosyncrasies of your ministers. I mean, that's just how they naturally interface, communicate, and I have no challenges with how Minister Montague, his own style of executing his ministerial duties. But there is also a difference in what is considered to be acceptable ministerial behavior in terms of how you put out information, in terms of meeting the what is considered natural in terms of what you are required to do ministerially in terms of your management of portfolio and the like. And in Minister Montague's presentation, I was amazed at the number of projects that he has implemented and the effort he is making, in particular with working with the police and trying to build the confidence of the police and dealing with the internal issues with the JCF and in the other areas as well that falls under his portfolio in terms of improvements in PICA and at the FLA, making sure that investigations go on, that there is transformation happening at the FLA. So in general, I think he is meeting the targets. But I think we would have to agree that, especially within the last few months, there's been some communication issues. And knowing Bobby as I know him, he is certainly going to go back to the drawing board and reflect and make corrections for those things. In terms of the reshuffle, all I can say is wait and see.
Was there a
No,
third question?
but in terms of the last question, I'm not recalling fully the comment that you referred to. I do recall a statement that crime fighting is testing the strength of the government, crime itself. But that doesn't mean we're losing the battle. Something being challenging doesn't mean that we're losing. And for me, as they said, the hotter the battle, the sweeter the victory. So we are putting in the effort. There's no question in the minds of the public that we have taken a very strategic approach to fighting crime. People obviously would want to see immediate results. The measures that could bring immediate results could also cause immediate problems. And we have learned that lesson already, and we are not going back to those measures. We're going to focus on building public trust, building the confidence of the security forces that they can apply modern policing methods that respect the rights of the citizens, that rely on intelligence in both senses of the word, both in terms of smart policing and in terms of finding information. Those strategies take time because not only in their implementation, but in the lead up to implementing them, because the forces have not always operated in that way. So the force, you may not see it looking on from the public, but they are now in the process of reallocating their resources to be able to execute the strategies that we have asked them to do. So if you stop and think about the zones of special operations, the police have to make a human resource allocation decision. And what the zones do, it forces them to place their manpower where the problems are. It also forces them to make long-term commitments to the problems. So a lot of people say, why you needed legislation, why you needed the zone? But it's a deeper thinking than common sense thinking. We have two major problems: guns and gangs. If you were to ask 2 years ago, what is the strategy to deal with gangs and deal with guns? You would know. Now you have a National Security Council that is bringing together the whole of government to deal with the issues of gangs and guns in concentrated spaces. A lot of criticism. Is it working? Is it drawing for the murder rate is still going up? The murder rate was going up before the implementation of the zones. One zone would not have an impact on the national murder rate. The objective was that it must have an impact on the zone, and it must have an impact on the immediate surroundings. And if any journalist is interested, you could go and check what is the impact on the zone in terms of crime and on the police district in terms of crime. As the zone is rolled out in terms of fulfilling its 60 days and then reassessed, you could at the end of the year extrapolate whether or not the reduction in that zone had an impact on the national outturn at the end of the year. But right now, it is too early to start to draw conclusions. The truth is that we need more zones. We identified the hotspot areas, and the resource allocation is made to support it, not just on the security level, but most importantly, on the community development level. This will take some time, but when we bring down our murder rate, it will be sustained, and it will be for the benefit of all Jamaicans. You go and talk to the people in the first zone. They are the ones that matter in the discourse, because they are the ones who would be the first line of being affected by crime in the areas.
Mr. Prime Minister, let's go back to social media. I do know that there are 3 hands that I have seen, so let's get to social media first. Adrian Henriquez, using the hashtag PM Quarterly, asks, Mr. Prime Minister, you announced more than a year ago today that Goat Island's Transshipment Port Logistics Hub initiative would be scrapped, and that your government had already done so, citing the environmental concerns and fragility of the Port and Bight protected area. The question, is the Transshipment Port Logistics Hub initiative still in the pipeline? If so, has the government of Jamaica yet found an alternative site for the Transshipment and Logistics Hub?
Well, we don't want to confuse two things. You don't need to build a new port to start your logistics hub operations. So Jamaica has always been involved in logistics operations, particularly at the level of transshipment. The infrastructure that you really need to have your logistics hub is, first of all, legislation that would support the setting up of businesses and industries that use the port as their source of supply and transportation. So you want to have legislation, which we have just completed, special economic zones, for businesses who would choose to do assembly, disassembly, light manufacturing in proximity to the port, who could use your customs and fiscal incentives, who would use your location to transship their products globally. So Jamaica, by its location, has a natural advantage in being a logistics hub. But the regulations have not always been there to support it. The regulations are there now. We have passed the Special Economic Zones Act. There is an authority now that governs it, and we have passed the regulations. So from a logistics perspective, you can now come and locate in Jamaica with all the related industries. We still have some work to do on the Customs Act to make sure that on that side there is support, but the framework is now there. The infrastructure now, the physical infrastructure, we have divested the port, we have dredged the channel for larger ships to come in. A new system is in place to manage the offloading and unloading of containers. So all the elements of creating a logistics operation is now coming in place. A new port would certainly add, but you would want to have your new port where you don't have to contend with the environmental issues, where the existing port and the new port work in complement to each other rather than, competing with each other. And before you do a new port, you really want to establish your existing port. You want it to reach its capacity, exceed its capacity, and then you move into a new port. So all of that is being thought of now. All of that is being done. I want to bring you up to date that the special economic zone in the Caymanas area, that is underway. A study is being done now by, that's World Bank is doing that study? It's funded, a World Bank funded study. So all of that is still being done. So we are not out there talking about logistics hub. We are doing logistics hub. We visited Singapore, we visited Israel, which are two countries that have excelled in this area. And we have learned many important lessons from them. We have brought consultancies in from them to help us to position and do the things necessary. So logistics hub, still a big part of the government's growth agenda, but we are implementing the things to actually bring a logistics hub to fruition.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. It is now 25 minutes to 11 o'clock. I think we can agree to wrap in about 10 minutes. And so I'll recognize the hands I've seen so far, which are Erica, Edmund, and Dion. Those are the hands I saw before, and we'll take one last one from social media. So let me get to Edmund first.
Okay,
yes.
Good. Thank you very much. So Prime Minister, some quick questions again. Why is it taking the government so long to apologize to the people of Tivoli Gardens regarding the events of May 2010, where we saw more than 70 people killed? That's one. Two, are you satisfied with the competence of the commission that has been carrying out the investigation into the collapse of the financial sector in the 1990s, the FinSAC Commission, especially against the background of there's so many extensions that have been asked for from this commission, and the significant sums that have been pumped into this whole matter? And the final question, two constituencies, South West St. Andrew and St. Andrew South, they've been without members of parliament, as you would know, now for about 2 months or more. These persons, I suspect, need representation. They have issues they would want to deal with, community issues and so on. Can you give us an idea as to when these constituencies will be getting their members of parliament? I suppose it lies in your hand.
We don't want to just give an empty apology. We want the apology to coincide with the compensation review committee. And that committee is close to finishing, or they're finished now, Minister? All right, so by next week we'll have a report from that. So we wanted the apology, which is, we have already written the apology. We have approved it in cabinet. But, because of what has happened, we don't want to just say we are sorry. I mean, apology should also come with some form of compensation, and there is a process, and that process took its time. So as soon as we look at the review, we will move swiftly after that to do the apology. And I think it's so important that we close this chapter in Jamaica's history and draw a line and learn from those mistakes. In terms of the FinSAC Commission, I really wanted the commission to finish very quickly and set a very tight timeline, but it appears that the volume of work and the commissioners themselves want to ensure that the work is of a high quality. Since we have started on the road, it didn't make sense to abandon it. But we have set a very firm timeline now. There will be no, and I'm saying this publicly, there will be no extensions, and there will be no more additional funding. The last extension and the last additional amount will be the last. I'm binding myself to that publicly. So I'm expecting a report, and again, another chapter in our history that we should put to a close, but importantly, learn from. In terms of the 2 constituencies in Kingston, very shortly.
Erica?
Prime Minister, given the destruction of parts of the region by the forces of Father Nature and our vulnerabilities to same, is there, yes, I did say Father Nature, mothers get too much blame. Is there a real need for the urgent development of new building codes, parish development orders, and the forced removal, if necessary, of persons living in existing danger zones in Jamaica?
I think that the Minister of Local Government is on record as saying that he will make it mandatory for persons to be removed from areas declared to be at risk in the event of a natural disaster. So that is a policy of the government. In terms of the building code, I believe, was tabled. The new building code was tabled, and the development orders. But I gather that there are still concerns being raised from the industry side, and I'm almost sure, don't quote me on this one, but I know that the minister has been having dialogue with the stakeholders that have raised concerns. So there is a possibility that there might be some amendments, but just to reassure you that the new building codes are actually tabled. He opened a debate on it. The process of closing it, I'm certain, will happen as soon as they have resolved whatever technical issues there are.
My apologies, Prime Minister. That's just TBC had a question from earlier. She had get up and gone, so she's back. Could you identify yourself for us and ask your question, please?
Good morning, Prime Minister. Yanil Wood from TBC Radio. I know the government is trying to make money in different ways. May I ask if it is possible for the NHT, when they build the houses, apartments, whatever else, if they could keep control of it and run it to make money instead of handing it over to residents? Because by experience, it's not working out well. So I know of places that have ran down completely, persons have moved out, but why is it that they only build, hand it over, move on to another building? Why can't they run it? Meaning make money from us, take the strata fees from us, take over the place.
Look, I share your concern. You know, I grew up in a housing scheme in Spanish Town in Ensom City, a place called Riverside Park. I thought it was such a lovely place when it initially started. But as people lost interest, economic circumstances, owners moved out and rented, so people who are now living there don't have an ownership stake. People just ignore the rules. So once it starts one place, nobody says anything or can't say anything, and then it continues, the entire place is depreciated. Now, from my perspective, the role of the NHT, and the head of the NHT is here, Mr. Martin Miller, is to build houses, affordable houses for contributors, and to develop the communities. So the NHT does have a community development role. I am not clear in my mind that that extends to strata management or community management. But they could, in terms of a development perspective, cause that to happen in a different way. I wish to bring to your attention that there are other laws that are being strengthened on the books now, which would be the strata, help me out there, the strata corporate, well, Mr. Nepa is here, Mr. Knight. I should ask you to answer those questions. That there are other pieces of legislation. And then we are going to promulgate very soon the Gated Communities Act, which will strengthen the authority of the management of these kinds of communities to ensure that the value is preserved, right? I take the view that people must take pride in where they live. You know, you can't make an investment in your house and then right next door somebody comes and put up a garage, as we have seen in some instances. Now, we understand all the issues. People have to survive, but you have to survive within rules. And what has happened to our society over these many years is that we have been surviving without rules. So only those who are, well, let me not go down that road. Let me pull back on that statement. But as one person said, you know, those who play by the rules, and we have to change that. Those who play by the rules must be rewarded. That is the country that we want to build. So I'll leave you on that comment. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Prime Minister, there was one more from social media and
sure.
one more from Dion Jacksonville. If you could indulge us, please.
I could never close without taking the final question from Dion.
Yes. So Dion, please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Let me just very briefly go back to two questions that you had sidestepped earlier on. Firstly, and let me try to assist by asking them as narrowly as possible. So first of all, yes or no, do you still retain confidence in your Minister of National Security, Bobby Montague? Two, you said there is no basis for concern about the Junction Road, but my question had been in relation to the considered concern that had been expressed by the political ombudsman. So I'm asking you yes or no, do you reject the concerns that have been expressed by the political ombudsman? You said in your overview, 3, you would like to see more cooperation between the schools and the ministry over the no tuition fee policy, sounding as if these are two entirely external institutions. One is your own minister, so it kind of sounds as if you're throwing shade at him. Are you saying you are dissatisfied with how the education minister handled that issue?
Well, so to answer your first question, yes, I have confidence in Bobby Montague. The second question about whether or not the concerns raised about the $600 million road improvement are valid, I would say they are not valid, but there is a general concern about how public resources are spent, particularly closer to an election for partisan benefit, and we are always prepared to engage in a conversation, in a process to have oversight of that. In fact, that will be a part of our bipartisan talks to see how we can mitigate that. So I'm prepared to address those issues. The third question, just remind me, I didn't get to write it. Oh, the no tuition. No, I am not making any criticism of either the minister or the principals. To be clear, not all schools are owned by the government. So there are some schools that are trust or church schools. They are aided by the government, but they are owned by third sector. My comment really came from a conversation that I had with a member of the board of one such school, who also lamented that, you know, the public back and forth about fees could potentially have a negative impact. And I'm agreeing that the policy that we want is one of cooperation, and the minister himself recognized that, and when he addressed the JTA conference, he also made that point, and I am reinforcing that point, that we can't win if the stakeholders in education are in a confrontational mood. So my intervention is to say to all stakeholders, let us work together in partnership. The government's policy is solid. It is not just talk. We have put more money in. We recognize that it clearly is not going to be enough. But if we start to separate on this issue, we will not be working to the benefit of the students.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. And finally, again, we got more than 100 questions from social media, so we're trying to get them in. Final question from Mr. Umari Samuels, using the hashtag PM Quarterly. He asks, what's the status on relieving Jamaica of constitutional ties to the Queen and claiming complete independence as a nation?
The question is a fundamental one. What do we consider independence? Is it the political architecture that makes us independent? Or is it that we don't owe anyone anything? For me, you know, I learned about independence from my mother, who said, don't owe anyone anything. It is a very basic concept in the Jamaican psyche. Be economically independent. My effort, time, and resources are focused on making Jamaica truly independent. And let me put it to you in practical terms. 3 hurricanes devastated parts of the Caribbean. None of those countries on their own can recover. Jamaica's ability to assist is extremely limited. We could offer manpower, but we don't own an aircraft to airlift them. Our nationals were stranded. We don't own airlift or boat lift capacity to take them home. We have to ask for external help. Don't tell me about political independence. Tell me about how we're going to grow our economy to get these things so we can truly exert our political independence. That is where we are. That is what we are focused on. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, and thank you so much to the heads of agencies who have attended and to members of the media, those who were live and those who joined us here. Thank you too to those who joined us on social media. Have a good morning, everybody.